Everyone knows the name Jack the Ripper. Everyone knows he was first, the original faceless killer who stalked women in the dark and was never caught. He wasn't first. 3 years before Jack the Ripper claimed a single victim in London, a killer was already doing the same thing in Austin, Texas. And to this day, nobody has ever agreed on who he was. Between December of 1884 and December of 1885, 8 people were murdered in their beds in Austin, Texas, across 7 separate attacks. At least 6 more were attacked in the night and survived. The killer, or killers, because even Austin itself never agreed on that, was never caught. The case was never solved. And most people, even true crime obsessives who can recite Jack the Ripper's victims by heart, have never even heard of it. Today it's remembered, when it's remembered at all, as the servant Girl Annihilator or the Midnight Assassin. This is the true story of the year Austin lived in terror, told through the people it actually happened to. 8 names, 1 unsolved year, and a theory built decades later that still won't fully die. Here's what actually happened. Every shadow has a name. It began on December the 30th, 1884. Molly Smith, 25 years old, a domestic servant, was murdered in the night. Her partner, Walter Spencer, was attacked in the same assault, badly wounded, but he survived to describe what little he could. To Austin, at the time, this looked like one isolated, terrible crime. Nobody yet had any reason to think it was the start of anything larger. For almost 3 months, nothing happened. Then, on March the 19th, 1885, 2 Swedish immigrant servants, Clara Strand and Christine Martinsson, were attacked in their beds. Both survived. Whoever was responsible was still out there. On May the 6th, Eliza Shelley, another domestic servant, was murdered in her home. 16 days later, on May the 22nd, Irene Cross was killed too, but not with an axe like every attack before her. She was killed with a knife. That single inconsistency mattered more than it might sound. It's part of the reason Austin itself couldn't agree at the time whether one man was responsible for all of this or several. Even the pattern investigators thought they'd found didn't fully hold. In August, Clara Dick was attacked and survived. Then, on August the 30th, 11-year-old Mary Ramey was murdered in an attack that also badly wounded her mother, Rebecca, who survived. Mary is the only child killed in this entire case. She deserves to be named, not folded into a headline. On September the 28th, Gracie Vance, a domestic servant, and her boyfriend, Orange Washington, were murdered together. By now, the fear that had lived in Austin's black neighborhoods for months was starting to reach the rest of the city. A pattern of sorts had emerged by now. Victims attacked in their beds at night, most struck with an axe that was simply left behind at the scene afterward. Several of them were carried out into the yard once the attack was over, and bare footprints kept turning up in the dirt outside, as if, each time, the killer took his boots off before he went in. Then, on Christmas Eve, 1885, everything changed. Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips, just 17 years old, the mother of a 1-year-old son, were both murdered the same night in their own homes. Eula's house still has a documented address, 302 West Hickory Street. Both women's husbands were attacked in the same assaults, and both survived their wounds. For the first time in this entire case, the victims weren't domestic servants living in small quarters on the city's east side. They were white, married women, killed inside wealthier households. And that single fact is what finally made the rest of Austin pay attention. Stated precisely, because the precision matters, 8 people murdered across 1 year. 5 black women, 1 black man, 1 black child, 2 white women, at least 6 more seriously wounded, left to live with it. Not a rounded off statistic, 8 actual names. The name most people know today, the servant Girl Annihilator, wasn't even a real 1885 headline. It was coined privately in a personal letter by a 23-year-old Austin resident joking about, quote, the frequent raids of the servant Girl Annihilators. His name was William Sidney Porter. Later, the world would know him as the writer O. Henry. The real 1885 response wasn't a headline, it was panic. Roughly 400 men were questioned by Austin authorities over the course of the year. Every single one was released. Nobody was ever convicted of any of the 8 murders themselves. After the Christmas Eve murders, the city stopped treating this as a problem confined to the servants' quarters. The response almost overnight was dramatic. The police force was tripled in size. A curfew was enacted across the city. Private citizens organized their own armed neighborhood patrols, walking the streets after dark. Saloons and downtown establishments that had stayed open all night, every night, were suddenly ordered to close their doors at midnight. Austin, in other words, finally treated this like the citywide emergency it had already been for a year. In the end, it was 2 grieving husbands the system turned on. James Phillips Jr., Eula's husband, was charged with murdering his own wife, based largely on witness testimony that he'd shown a violent temper toward her before. He was convicted in May of 1886. That conviction was thrown out on appeal soon after for insufficient evidence. And in a detail almost too strange for fiction, his own defense team had pulled up the bloody footprint floorboards from the actual murder scene and compared them in court against his own feet. Moses Hancock, Susan's husband, was charged too and put through the same ordeal. He was acquitted shortly after trial. That's the honest final tally on Austin's investigation. 2 men who had just lost their wives, formally treated as murder suspects and formally cleared, while whoever actually did it was never charged with anything at all. Here's something worth sitting with. No single detective's name survives anywhere in the record of this case. Every account just says police or the authorities, a group, never a person you could put a face to. Even the eyewitness descriptions contradicted each other completely. A white man, a dark-complexioned man, a man reportedly wearing a woman's dress, his face darkened with lampblack. Some people in the neighborhoods hit hardest came to believe something stranger than a man was at work, that not one dog in the whole city had barked, no matter how close the killer came to a house. That belief belonged to 1885, not to evidence, and this episode isn't presenting it, but it tells you, better than any statistic could, exactly how frightened this city actually was. In February of 1886, weeks after the Christmas Eve murders, a young black Austin man named Nathan Elgin attacked a woman named Julia with a knife at a saloon in the Masontown neighborhood. A police officer named Bracken shot him. Elgin died of a spinal wound the following day. After Elgin's death, the murders stopped, permanently. No more attacks, ever, in Austin matching that pattern. In 2014, nearly 130 years later, PBS's history detectives named Elgin a leading suspect candidate using historical and geographic research. One detail drove the theory. Elgin was missing a toe, which some researchers argue matches an unusual bare footprint found at a crime scene. It's worth saying plainly, this case has drifted into fiction before, too. A 2000 novel reimagined these murders with a young O. Henry as a character, and a podcast used the name for its own invented mystery. None of that is history. This PBS research, whatever you make of it, at least is. Here's the hedge that matters. This was never a contemporary charge, and never a conviction. It's a modern theory, built from timing and a footprint, decades after the fact. The murders stopping is suggestive. It is not proof. Other names surface in the record too. A cook known only as Maurice, a Wild West show performer named Buck Taylor. But both are thinly sourced, single mentions in the historical record, worth knowing, not worth treating as equal to anything else in this case. In October of 1888, an editor at the Atlanta Constitution newspaper first suggested a connection. Could the Austin killings and the Whitechapel murders happening that same autumn in London be the work of the same man? Ripper historian Philip Sugden examined that theory seriously in his own respected history of the case. His conclusion, in his own words, no link was ever definitively established. Decades later, the theory got a second life. Author Shirley Harrison argued that a Liverpool cotton merchant named James Maybrick was both Jack the Ripper and the Austin killer. Her strongest evidence was a document known as the Maybrick Diary, Maybrick's supposed own confession published in the 1990s by a man named Michael Barrett. In 1995, Michael Barrett confessed, under oath, that he had forged the diary himself and described exactly how he did it. That's the strongest piece of evidence the Ripper theory ever had, and its own author admitted, on the record, that he made it up. No historian, then or since, has ever proven that the same person committed both sets of murders. Not Sugden, who took the theory seriously and still couldn't establish it. Not anyone in the 100+ years since. It remains exactly what it started as, a genuinely eerie coincidence in timing between two cities, and nothing more provable than that. So here is what actually happened, stripped all the way down to the record. 8 people were murdered in Austin, Texas, across one terrible year in 7 separate attacks, with at least 6 more left wounded and living with it. Roughly 400 men were questioned and released. 2 grieving husbands were formally wrongly prosecuted and formally cleared. A theory tied it, decades later, to London, and collapsed the moment its best evidence was confessed to be a forgery. And the man, or men, actually responsible were never definitively identified. Not in 1886, not since. Say their names one more time. Molly Smith, Eliza Shelley, Irene Cross, Mary Ramey, 11 years old, Orange, Washington, Gracie Vance, Susan Hancock, Eula Phillips, 17 years old. 8 people, 8 names, an unsolved case, still open 140 years later. The myth says Jack the Ripper started it all. The truth is, Austin, Texas got there first, and the truth doesn't need a more famous killer attached to it to matter. If the record mattered more to you than the legend, follow Umbra Numa for the next one. Jack the Ripper wasn't first. Austin, Texas was, and to this day, no one agrees who was standing in the dark. Locals swore not one dog in the whole city ever barked at him. It was never explained. Somewhere, another file just like this one is still sealed. The next shadow is already waiting. Follow Umbra Numa. Every shadow has a name.